Hello out there, and welcome to one of our College Confidential segments, probably the biggest one of the year because we are at the apex, the final moment of the countdown to the college football playoff, and TCU looks like they're in. Baylor's knocking on the door, and we got two huge football games here in this area that are going to have a lot of national impact. And one of them's right here in Fort Worth, Carlos, the Frogs, hanging at number 3.
Yeah, we're going to have a full press box out there for that early morning start at Amon G. Carter. But it's going to be an interesting game because, even though it's a lesser opponent for TCU, they've got to play it like it's one of the best teams they've played all year because, they can't afford one of these 23-17 wins.
Right. I mean, you saw what happened to Baylor with, holding on for a 2-point escape against Tech. Everybody else rises and they stay stagnant, and you can't afford to stay stagnant at this stage of the game, and you can't afford to have a stinkeroo when you're clearly the better team.
Yeah, and it'll be hard to provide evidence to drop you 2 spots.
I agree.
At this stage of the year, 1 game left. But certainly if you lose, that's enough evidence. If you play close, you're getting close to that line. But I don't think it'll be a close game. It should be 2 touchdowns, 3 touchdowns, 4 touchdowns, something along the way. And if TCU has shown us anything all year, it's that they're consistent. These guys have played games from start to finish.
Right.
They had their clunker. Everybody's got a clunker. But there's only been 5 quarters this year where TCU has not scored during the game.
That's an incredible stat.
Out of 44 quarters now.
Right.
One of them actually was last week, the 3rd quarter against Texas. But, the larger point is that TCU has played the game well. They've been rewarded for playing the game well. And they need one more of those games, and I think they'll deliver it.
I think they will, too. And for Baylor fans that keep harping on, hey, it's all about head-to-head, what is this talk of consistency? Well, it's an issue. Baylor has been kind of hot and cold. I mean, for the last 3 quarters of their win at Oklahoma, they were arguably the best team I've seen in any game this season. And then West Virginia gets away from them. The second half in Tech gets away from them. Even parts of the Oklahoma State game the previous week, they had the game well in hand, and Oklahoma State's driving in the 4th quarter with a chance to cut into a 14-point lead in Waco, and things are getting a little dicey. I mean, the committee has a fine line, and there's a lot of separators. And the best news for everybody, there's going to be people lose this week. Baylor may be one of them. I don't think TCU will. Florida State may be one of them. Ohio State may be one of them. Out of those top 6, you can almost set your watch by the fact 1 or 2 will lose.
Yeah, and what I found interesting is I think the committee is watching these games versus looking at the scores, looking at the box score.
Clear, and making an assumption off stats.
They're getting an impression from the way these teams are playing. And this is a point that Gary Patterson was making, is that there are some real football minds on that committee who understand what good football is.
Yes.
And I think teams are getting penalized and rewarded for that. I think so. I think the best case for that is Florida State. They are winning, there's no doubt about it, but everybody in this ranking is winning. So you've got to separate them somehow because some wins are better than others, let's face it.
In the classic mindset of the polling process and just in looking at numbers, when you put down teams' records, it's really hard visually to look at a team with a 12-0 record and say, why aren't they at the top? And, Florida State's dropped 3 times to number 4. And are they right? I think based on the way the games have been played, that they're probably not. If they played one of those top 3 teams, they'd probably get beat. But having won those games, I mean, that's why they've been higher in the polls, is because it's kind of hard to discount that undefeated record. It should stand for something.
Yeah, and it does stand for something. They're still in the top 4. They're still getting their chance to play for the national title, and they may prove it there when they get those 2 games in. But what you've got to judge them on now is what they've done, and that's what you think they've done is about the 4th best performance of the year.
Okay, well, we talked a second ago about potential upsets, and that's what people want to know about this week. TCU, by and large, is in with a win unless it's a really, 1-point ugly win. For Baylor to get in, they need some upsets. They need to beat Kansas State. Of those other conference championship games, who are the most vulnerable teams out there and why?
I think it's Ohio State because they've got a new quarterback, and they're playing a team that has the best running back in football.
And they're not a great run defense team to begin with.
No, and so this game is going to stay close. There's going to be a pressure moment that comes up, where you've got to be clutch. And which team is that going to be? Well, certainly they're both equipped to handle that moment, but I'm going to go with the guy that I can hand the ball to versus a guy that hasn't played all year at the most important position of the game.
Yeah, the biggest game of the year. Well, I agree with that. And the other, I think Wisconsin could have won that game even if J.T. Barrett had played. I think those teams are that close. The other one I look at is Florida State. Georgia Tech is very unique. They run the triple option. They're the best under-the-radar team in the country. It's amazing to me that they get so little talk. They've won 10 games. They're ranked 11th. They're more than capable of taking down Florida State, and Florida State's more than capable of letting it happen. So those two kind of jump out at me. As terms of going into this week, if you're the one-man committee, Carlos, who are your four right now, and who do you think it winds up being?
My four right now, Oregon, TCU, Florida State, and Baylor. Those are the four best teams, in my opinion, at this point.
It's hard for me to throw out Florida State and their undefeated record. So, I like Bama, Oregon, Florida State, TCU. I think that's how it winds up, but I'm not going to, that changes if Georgia Tech wins. I think Ohio State loses. Georgia Tech, that coin is in the air. And if Georgia Tech beats them, that opens up a spot for Baylor, I honestly believe. And do you think it ends up with the four you mentioned, with both Big 12 teams being participants?
No, I think Alabama will be in there. I think TCU will be there, and Oregon's going to be there because they're all going to win this week. But that fourth spot, I don't know. Spin the wheel. Let's see who ends up.
Hey, that's why they play the games. That's why we like to talk about it. And a lot of big ones on Saturday. Dial those in, and thank you for watching us today.